So, let me get this straight, Staff Sergeant Maria Chen said, leaning back in her chair and fixing the alien diplomat with an incredulous stare. You guys seriously thought humans were harmless because we're classified as a pre-FTL emotional support species? The Vexillian ambassador, who looked like what would happen if you crossed a praying mantis with a disco ball, clicked his mandibles in what passed for their species equivalent of an embarrassed cough. Well, yes, your endearing tendency to form emotional bonds with non-sapient creatures and your primitive propulsion technology led our xenologists to conclude that humanity was, how do I phrase this diplomatically, more suited to providing companionship than participating in galactic affairs. Maria burst out laughing so hard she nearly fell out of her chair. The other humans in the conference room weren't doing much better at maintaining their composure. Captain Rodriguez was trying to hide his grin behind his coffee mug, and Dr. Watson had buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with barely suppressed giggles. Oh man, Maria wheezed, wiping tears from her eyes. That's actually amazing. So what exactly changed your minds? Was it when we blew up that pirate fleet that was harassing your outer colonies? The ambassador's crystalline exoskeleton briefly shifted to a deep purple, their version of a blush. Actually, it was during the subsequent diplomatic briefing when your military liaison casually mentioned something called the Geneva Convention, and had to explain why humans needed formal rules about what constitutes acceptable behavior during warfare. Ah. Maria's grin turned slightly predatory. Yeah, that'll do it. The story of how humanity went from adorable pre-FTL emotional support species to, oh shit, they have rules about what kinds of war crimes they're not allowed to commit, is one of my favorite tales to tell at the bar. I was there for most of it, so gather around, kids, and let me tell you how it all went down. It started, as these things often do, with a massive misunderstanding. See, the galactic community had been watching Earth for a while, trying to figure out what to make of us. And what they saw was a species that hadn't cracked FTL travel yet. Wasn't particularly advanced in terms of weapons technology, by their standards, and spent an inordinate amount of time and resources caring for other species that weren't even sapient. To them, this painted a pretty clear picture. Humans were obviously some kind of companion species, probably uplifted by now extinct precursors to serve as emotional support for more advanced civilizations. The fact that we hadn't developed FTL yet just meant we were still in our early stages. I wish I was making this up, but I've seen the actual xenological reports. They classified us right between therapy animals and sentient houseplants. The really hilarious part is that they considered our tendency to anthropomorphize things and form emotional attachments to be our primary evolutionary advantage. They weren't entirely wrong about that last bit. To be fair, they just drastically misunderstood the implications. The first hint that they might have miscalculated came when the Drachnid pirates started hitting the Vexillian outer colonies. The Vexillians, being a naturally peaceful species, were having trouble dealing with the situation. Their military response was, let's call it mathematically optimal, but practically useless. They kept trying to position their defense fleets in perfect geometric patterns that looked great on paper but left huge gaps the pirates could exploit. That's when humanity decided to demonstrate one of our species' other evolutionary advantages, our ability to think like complete bastards when we need to. The UN Security Council, in what might be the fastest decision they've ever made, authorized a joint task force to deal with the pirate problem. We didn't have FTL ships of our own yet, but the Vexillians were happy to provide transport for their adorable emotional support humans. They probably thought we were coming along to boost morale or something. Instead, they got front row seats to watching humans do what humans do best. Take everything we've learned from countless generations of warfare and apply it in creative and terrifying ways. The pirates had been using the asteroid fields around the colonies for cover, playing hit-and-run tactics that the Vexillians couldn't counter. Their perfect formation-based strategy fell apart in the chaos of asteroid-riddled space. But you know who's really good at fighting dirty in tight spaces with limited visibility? Humans. Specifically, human marines who've studied centuries of urban warfare doctrine. We treated those asteroid fields like a giant three-dimensional urban combat zone. The pirates would hide behind an asteroid, thinking they were safe, only to find out that humans had figured out things like flanking maneuvers and suppressing fire a very, very long time ago. The task force commander, Admiral Chen, yes, my mom, nepotism is alive and well in space, adapted old submarine warfare tactics for space combat. The pirates never saw it coming. Literally. They were so focused on the Vexillian ships flying in their precise patterns that they completely missed our ships playing hunt-and-kill games in the asteroid fields. The whole campaign lasted about 3 weeks. By the end of it, The pirate fleet was either destroyed or surrendered, and the Vexillians were looking at us very, very differently. That's when the fun really started. During the post-operation briefing, Captain Rodriguez was giving a presentation on human combat doctrine. One of the Vexillian admirals asked about our rules of engagement, probably expecting something similar to their own highly formalized combat protocols. Instead, they got a crash course in the history of human warfare, starting with Rodriguez explaining why we needed things like the Geneva Convention in the first place. The poor Vexillian admiral's exoskeleton went through about 15 different colors, while Rodriguez casually listed off all the things humans had agreed not to do to each other in war anymore. "Wait," the admiral interrupted, their crystalline form now a concerning shade of green. "You're saying these conventions weren't to establish what methods of warfare to use, but rather to prohibit methods you'd already invented?" "Oh yeah," Rodriguez replied, taking a sip of coffee. "Trust me, for every war crime that's specifically banned, there's a historical reason why we had to ban it. Humans are really creative when it comes to finding new ways to hurt each other. That's why we need these rules, to keep ourselves in check." You could have heard a pin drop in that briefing room. Every Vexillian present was staring at us with their compound eyes wide open, probably reevaluating every interaction they'd ever had with humans. That's when Dr. Watson, bless her heart, decided to be helpful and pulled up a historical presentation about the development of human warfare through the ages. By the time she got to the medieval period, 3 Vexillian officers had to excuse themselves. They didn't even make it to the World Wars. The ambassador who'd originally classified us as an emotional support species was present for that briefing. I'll never forget how they looked when they realized that the same species they'd classified as harmless had independently invented things like biological warfare, psychological operations, and orbital bombardment, even if we hadn't quite figured out how to do that last one in practice yet. But you're so nice to your pets!" they finally managed to stammer out. "Oh yeah," I replied with a grin. "We're very protective of those we consider under our care. Just ask the pirates what happens when someone threatens something humans have decided to protect." That's when the penny really dropped for them. All those traits they'd observed, our protective instincts, our ability to form strong emotional bonds, our pack bonding with other species, suddenly took on a whole new context. We weren't some kind of cosmic therapy animal. We were apex predators who had developed such strong social bonds and protective instincts that we'd extended them beyond our own species. The revised xenological report that came out a few weeks later was a thing of beauty. It basically amounted to: urgent update. Humans are not emotional support animals. They are pack-bonding predators with nuclear weapons and a concerning ability to weaponize anything they can get their hands on. The fact that they're nice to their pets just means they've decided to adopt other species into their pack structure. Do not threaten human pets. The really funny part? After all that, after learning about our capacity for warfare and violence, after discovering that we had to make actual rules about not committing war crimes, the galactic community still ended up using us for emotional support. They just did it with a lot more respect and a healthy dose of fear. These days, humanity has a somewhat unique position in galactic society. We're still known for our ability to form strong emotional bonds and our protective instincts. But nobody mistakes that for weakness anymore. Instead, we've become something like the galactic community's protective older sibling. The one who's a bit scary, has a violent past they're not entirely proud of, but will absolutely throw down if someone threatens the family. The Vexillians still maintain diplomatic relations with us, though they've updated their protocols a bit. For one thing, they no longer classify any species without consulting at least 3 different xenologists and a military historian. They've also started studying human military doctrine, though they still seem disturbed by how much of it boils down to be unpredictable and fight dirty. As for me, I'm still serving as a military liaison to the Vexillian Defense Force. They've actually started implementing some of our tactical doctrines, though they insist on maintaining their geometric formations. Old habits die hard, I guess. The ambassador who made the original classification? They're still around, though they've switched to cultural affairs rather than military diplomacy. Last I heard, they were working on a comprehensive guide titled Understanding Human Pack Bonding Behaviors, a guide for non-terrestrial species. I hear it's going to have a whole chapter on why threatening dogs is a really, really bad idea. So yeah, that's the story of how humanity went from being classified as an emotional support species to being recognized as a force to be reckoned with. We still provide plenty of emotional support to our alien friends. We just do it while being fully acknowledged as the sophisticated predators we are. And you know what? I think that's exactly how it should be. After all, the best therapists are the ones who've been through some shit themselves and came out stronger on the other side. Wait, The young Vexillian cadet who'd been listening to my story suddenly spoke up, their exoskeleton shifting to a curious blue. Is that why the emergency protocols for first contact scenarios include the warning, if humans are present, do not harm any local fauna they might have bonded with? I grinned and took another sip of my beer. Yep. That warning exists because of an incident involving a human child's hamster and a drachnid pirate who learned the hard way that size differences don't matter nearly as much as tactical creativity and righteous fury. The cadet's exoskeleton briefly flickered to alarm red. Do I want to know what happened? Probably not, I admitted. Let's just say there's a reason death by hamster wheel is now officially listed as a potential combat hazard in the updated Xenological Combat Manual. The cadet stared at their drink for a long moment before looking back at me. You know, I used to think the warnings about humans were exaggerated. I'm starting to realize they might have been understated. I raised my glass in a toast. Welcome to the galaxy, kid. Rule number 1, never underestimate humanity's capacity for violence or kindness. We excel at both, often simultaneously. And that, as they say in the diplomatic corps, is why you should always read the fine print when classifying new species. Especially the part about evolved predatory behaviors and the capacity for tactical thinking. It saves everyone a lot of trouble in the long run. Though I have to admit, I kind of miss being classified as an emotional support species. It was pretty funny while it lasted. The Vexillian cadet was about to ask another question when their communicator chirped with an urgent message. Their crystalline form shifted to a concerned amber as they read it. Staff Sergeant Chen, they said, their mandibles clicking rapidly. There's a situation at the diplomatic quarter. Something about a human child, a Cranaxian traitor, and a teddy bear? I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. Please tell me the Cranaxian didn't try to confiscate the teddy bear. The cadet's color shifted to a worried purple. According to the report, they attempted to declare it as contraband due to its synthetic fur content? Oh, for fuck's sake, I muttered, downing the last of my beer. Right, let's go prevent an interstellar incident. Again. The thing about humans that most alien species still struggle to understand is that our protective instincts don't just extend to living creatures. We can and will form emotional attachments to inanimate objects, especially ones we've anthropomorphized. And there's nothing more anthropomorphized than a child's teddy bear. By the time we reached the diplomatic quarter, things had already escalated in a uniquely human way. A 6-year-old girl, later identified as Emily Watson, Dr. Watson's daughter, was standing her ground in front of a very confused Cranaxian traitor. The traitor, who looked like a cross between a stegosaurus and a filing cabinet, was holding a datapad displaying trade regulations about synthetic materials. The real problem wasn't the crying child or the bewildered Cranaxian. It was the growing crowd of humans who had noticed the situation. I counted at least 3 off-duty Marines, a couple of merchant spacers, and what appeared to be an entire tourist group from New Zealand. All of them were giving the Cranaxian the kind of looks that preceded entries in history books about unfortunate diplomatic incidents. Right, I said, stepping forward and switching to my official diplomatic liaison voice. What seems to be the problem here? The Cranaxian turned to me, waving their datapad. This contraband item contains restricted synthetic materials that... It's not contraband, it's Mr. Snuggles, Emily interrupted, her voice carrying that particular pitch that only angry 6-year-olds can achieve. And you can't have him. He's scared of the dark and needs me to sleep. I watched the Cranaxian's cybernetic translation implant try to process this statement. Their species is highly logical and bureaucratic. The concept of an inanimate object being scared was probably causing some serious cognitive dissonance. The regulations clearly state, they began, but I held up a hand. Sir, are you familiar with the updated xenological guidelines regarding human emotional attachments, specifically subsection 7b, comfort objects and cultural significance? The Cranaxians' headplates shifted in their species equivalent of a frown. No? Right then, quick crash course. I pulled out my own datapad and cleared my throat. Subsection 7b, paragraph 3. Human comfort objects, particularly those belonging to juvenile humans, are to be treated with the same diplomatic consideration as Class II cultural artifacts. Attempt to separate a human from their comfort object at your own risk. See Appendix C, the hamster wheel incident for historical context. The growing crowd of humans nodded approvingly. The Cranaxians' headplates were now clicking together in growing concern. Furthermore, I continued, under the Terra-Cranaxian Trade Agreement of 2157, Article 12 specifically exempts items of personal or cultural significance from the synthetic materials restriction. A child's teddy bear, I think you'll agree, falls rather definitively into that category. But the Kranaxian seemed to be struggling with the concept. It's just a synthetic fur construct in the shape of an Earth predator species. One of the off-duty Marines stepped forward, Corporal Jones, I think. You know what else is a synthetic construct? That fancy trade agreement you're trying to enforce? But I bet you'd be pretty upset if someone tried to confiscate that, wouldn't you? I shot Jones a warning look, but I had to admit it was a pretty good point. The Kranaxian's cybernetic implant must have finally finished processing the situation because their head plates suddenly snapped flat against their skull. Their species equivalent of an oh shit moment. I appear to have made an error in judgment, they said carefully. Perhaps we could resolve this through proper diplomatic channels. Or, I suggested, you could apologize to the nice human child, return her teddy bear, and we can all pretend this never happened. The Kranaxian looked at the crying child, then at the crowd of increasingly annoyed humans, then back at their datapad. Their head plates made a sound like shuffling papers. I formally rescind my attempt to confiscate this, Mr. Snuggles, they said, carefully pronouncing the name. My sincerest apologies for any distress caused. Emily immediately brightened, hugging her teddy bear close. It's okay. Mr. Snuggles forgives you. He says you just didn't know any better. The Kranaxian's translation implant definitely glitched on that one, but they had enough sense to just nod politely. As the crowd began to disperse, the Vexillian cadet who'd been watching the whole thing turned to me. Is it always like this? Nah, I replied with a grin. Sometimes it gets complicated. The cadet's exoskeleton shifted to a color I'd never seen before. That was not uncomplicated. Oh, my sweet summer child, I laughed. That was nothing. Wait until I tell you about the time we had to explain to the Arachnid Confederation why human children dress up as scary things for fun on Halloween. Did you know they had to update their entire psychological warfare doctrine after learning about trick-or-treating? The cadet's color shifted again. You're joking. Wish I was. Turns out a species that uses fear as a weapon had some trouble processing the idea that humans deliberately seek out things that scare them for entertainment. The concept of horror movies alone caused them to completely restructure their approach to psychological warfare. Why would you deliberately seek out fear? The cadet asked, genuinely puzzled. I shrugged. Same reason we keep inventing new ways to make spicy food even spicier. We like pushing our limits. Did you know there's a whole subset of human entertainment called extreme sports that's basically just finding new and exciting ways to nearly die? The cadet's exoskeleton cycled through several colors before settling on a confused mauve. I think I need to update my xenological studies. Probably a good idea. Oh, and you might want to add a note about teddy bears. They fall under the same protection category as actual pets when it comes to human emotional attachments. Noted, the cadet said faintly. Any other important cultural artifacts I should know about? Well, there's this thing called a security blanket, I began, but was interrupted by another urgent message on the cadet's communicator. Oh no, they said, their color shifting to alarm red again. There's another situation. Something about a human child insisting that their cardboard box spaceship has the same right to dock as actual spacecraft? I couldn't help but laugh. Welcome to diplomatic relations with humans, kid. Rule number 2. Never underestimate our ability to form emotional attachments to literally anything. Sometimes I think we could pack bond with a particularly interesting rock if we stared at it long enough. The cadet's exoskeleton shifted to a color that I'm pretty sure meant existential crisis. Come on, I said, clapping them on their crystalline shoulder. Let's go explain the cultural significance of cardboard box spaceships. And maybe after that, I'll tell you about the time we had to add imaginary friends to the official diplomatic registry, because a human child insisted on getting their invisible buddy proper credentials. As we walked toward the next crisis, I couldn't help but smile. Sure, being humanity's diplomatic liaison could be challenging, but at least it was never boring. And hey, at least we'd moved up from emotional support species to terrifying pack-bonding predators who will fight you over a teddy bear. Progress comes in many forms, I suppose. Sometimes it's developing FTL travel. Sometimes it's getting the galactic community to acknowledge that yes, the cardboard box is a spaceship, if the kid says it is. And no, you don't want to argue about it. Just another day in the life of a human diplomatic liaison. At least nobody tried to explain pillow forts today. The architectural engineers of most species still haven't recovered from that one. The cardboard box situation had just been resolved. Turns out the docking authority was willing to designate a special imagination dock after some creative diplomacy. when my comm unit buzzed with a priority message from Admiral Chen. Maria. My mother's holographic form flickered into view, her expression caught between amusement and concern. We might have a situation developing at the Galactic Cultural Exchange Conference. I groaned. Please tell me someone didn't try to explain human sports to the Hive Mind Collective again. We just got them to stop analyzing whether team spirit constitutes a form of psychic bonding. Worse, she replied. Someone brought a cat. Oh no. Oh yes, and not just any cat. Lieutenant Rodriguez brought Mr. Whiskers. For those not familiar with Mr. Whiskers, let me paint you a picture. Imagine the most stereotypically aloof house cat you can think of. Then give it an attitude that would make a drill sergeant pause. Mr. Whiskers had been the unofficial mascot of the SSV Tokyo for 3 years, and in that time he'd managed to cause more diplomatic incidents than a drunk space tourist with diplomatic immunity. How bad is it? I asked, already heading toward the conference center with the Vexillian cadet in tow. Well, Admiral Chen's hologram flickered as she consulted something off-screen. The mechanoid consensus is demanding to know how we've managed to create a biological AI that perfectly mimics indifference. The Scion Collective is insisting the cat must be a higher dimensional being in disguise, and the Hive Mind Collective is, well, they're having an existential crisis trying to understand how a single entity can simultaneously want attention and reject it. I picked up my pace. And the arachnids? Hiding in their embassy. Apparently Mr. Whiskers got into their delegation room and knocked over their ceremonial water globe while maintaining direct eye contact with their high commander. The cadet's exoskeleton had shifted to a color I'd never seen before, something between deeply concerned and morbidly fascinated. I don't understand, they said as we power-walked through the diplomatic quarter. Your species has created rules about orbital bombardment and biochemical warfare, but you keep these cats as companions? To be fair, I replied, dodging a group of startled mechanoid diplomats. Cats kind of decided to keep us as companions. We just went along with it. We arrived at the conference center to find absolute chaos. Mr. Whiskers was perched regally on top of the main podium, casually grooming himself while various alien diplomats either tried to understand his existence or avoid his attention entirely. A group of mechanoid analysts were frantically taking readings, their sensors whirring in confusion as they tried to decode the apparent paradox of cat behavior. Nearby, a Scion diplomat was attempting to establish psychic contact, only to receive the mental equivalent of a read receipt with no response. Fascinating, the cadet muttered, their crystalline form shifting through various analytical colors. The small predator appears to be executing some form of psychological warfare without any apparent effort. That's cats for you, I sighed, watching as Mr. Whiskers deliberately knocked over a ceremonial penholder while maintaining eye contact with the entire mechanoid delegation. They've mastered the art of psychological domination through pure indifference. Lieutenant Rodriguez was trying to coax Mr. Whiskers down with a laser pointer, which only resulted in the mechanoid consensus launching into a heated debate about the tactical applications of coherent light as a method of influence. The truly terrifying part, I explained to the cadet as we watched the scene unfold, is that this isn't even the worst diplomatic incident Mr. Whiskers has caused. There was this one time with the Zero-G Agricultural Conference and a ball of yarn. The cadet's color shifted to worried amber. Do I want to know? Let's just say we had to rewrite 3 different trade agreements and add a specific clause about feline-induced agricultural incidents to the Galactic Insurance Charter. Just then, Dr. Watson arrived, carrying what looked like an ordinary cardboard box. The moment she set it down, Mr. Whiskers immediately abandoned his podium throne and jumped into the box. The entire conference hall went silent. I don't understand. The mechanoid prime unit finally spoke. The entity has abandoned its tactically superior position for an empty container? If I fits, I sits, Dr. Watson explained with the patience of someone who'd had this conversation before. It's one of the fundamental laws of cat physics. The mechanoid delegation's processing lights all began blinking rapidly. The Scion diplomat who'd been trying to establish psychic contact suddenly sat down, looking dazed. But it's just a box, the cadet whispered. Remember what I said about humans and cardboard boxes? I replied. Turns out cats feel the same way. We think that might be one of the reasons our species got along so well. Admiral Chen's hologram flickered back to life beside us. The arachnid delegation is asking if it's safe to return yet. I looked over at Mr. Whiskers, now curled up in his box with an expression of supreme contentment. Yeah, should be fine now. Though they might want to avoid direct eye contact for a while. You know how cats get when they think they've established dominance over someone. Speaking of which, my mother added with a slight smirk, the Hive Mind Collective has submitted a formal request to study human-cat relationships as a model for understanding complex power dynamics. They seem particularly interested in something they're calling the paradox of servile dominance. I watched as a brave, or possibly malfunctioning, mechanoid analyst attempted to scan the box, only to quickly retreat when Mr. Whiskers gave them what humans have universally dubbed the look. Should we tell them that even humans haven't figured out the true nature of our relationship with cats? I asked. Probably not, Admiral Chen replied. Some mysteries of the universe are better left unexplored. Besides, I think the mechanoids are about to crash their primary logic circuits trying to understand why their scans show the box is simultaneously occupied and unoccupied until directly observed. Schrödinger would be proud, Dr. Watson muttered, watching as the mechanoid delegation began what appeared to be an emergency philosophical debate about the nature of feline quantum mechanics. The cadet, who had been quiet for a while, finally spoke up. So, humans not only formed emotional bonds with predator species, but also maintained diplomatic relations with entities that regularly challenge their authority? For fun? Pretty much, I confirmed. Though to be fair, cats kind of weapons-grade engineered themselves to appeal to our protective instincts. All the predatory grace of a killer, packed into a format that triggers our must-protect response. And this doesn't concern you? Oh, it absolutely should, I laughed. But they're fluffy and they purr, so we've collectively agreed to ignore the fact that we've essentially been psychologically manipulated by tiny predators for thousands of years. The cadet's exoskeleton shifted through several colors before settling on a shade that I'm pretty sure meant processing existential implications. I need to update my report, they finally said. Apparently humans are not just pack-bonding predators with nuclear weapons. They're pack-bonding predators with nuclear weapons who have formed a complex symbiotic relationship with smaller predators that may or may not understand quantum mechanics. Don't forget to mention the boxes, I reminded them. Both the cardboard spaceships and the quantum cat containers. Trust me, it's important for the historical record. As we left the conference center, leaving behind a room full of bewildered alien diplomats and one very satisfied cat in a box, I couldn't help but smile. Humanity had come a long way from being classified as an emotional support species, but in some ways, we were still providing emotional support to the galaxy, just not in the way anyone had expected. After all, someone had to help the alien species process their existential crises about cats, cardboard boxes, and the strange species that loved both while also having rules about orbital bombardment. Just another day in human diplomatic relations. At least nobody had tried to explain the concept of cat cafes to the Hive Mind Collective yet. That was definitely a crisis for another day. We were just leaving the conference center when my comm unit buzzed again. This time it was Captain Rodriguez, and he was laughing so hard he could barely speak. Maria, he wheezed, you need to get to the Galactic Sports and Recreation Committee meeting, right now. Why? I asked, already dreading the answer. What happened? Someone just tried to explain professional wrestling to the logical concordat. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. Please tell me they didn't show them any footage. They showed them the entire 2156 Lunar WrestleMania. Oh God. The logical concordat, for those not familiar with galactic politics, is a coalition of species who pride themselves on pure reason and mathematical precision. They make the Vulcans from old Earth sci-fi look downright emotional in comparison. And someone had just exposed them to one of humanity's most deliberately melodramatic forms of entertainment. How bad is it? I asked, already changing course toward the committee chambers. The chief logician is demanding to know why humans would deliberately engage in clearly choreographed combat while pretending it's real. The Combat Analysis Division is trying to understand the tactical significance of body slams, and the Cultural Understanding Bureau is having a collective breakdown trying to process the concept of kayfabe. The Vexillian cadet, who had been following all this with increasing confusion, clicked their mandibles. What is kayfabe? It's the practice of maintaining the illusion that professional wrestling is real, even though everyone knows it's staged, I explained as we hurried along. It's basically consensual mass pretending. The cadet's exoskeleton shifted to a color that suggested their universal translator might be malfunctioning. You deliberately pretend something is real, while knowing it isn't, and everyone agrees to pretend together? Welcome to human entertainment, I grinned. Wait until they find out about theater. We arrived at the committee chambers to find absolute chaos. Again, The chief logician of the Concordat was standing in the center of the room, pointing at a frozen hologram of a wrestler doing an elbow drop from the top rope. "This makes no tactical sense," they were shouting, their perfectly logical composure completely shattered. "The energy expenditure required to climb to an elevated position far exceeds any potential combat advantage, and the opponent clearly has sufficient time to move." "That's kind of the point," Captain Rodriguez was trying to explain. "It's about the spectacle, the drama, the—" "But why?" the chief logician interrupted, their voice hitting a pitch I didn't think their species was capable of reaching. "Why would you intentionally make combat less efficient for entertainment?" "Actually," a helpful human cultural attaché chimed in, "we do that with lots of things. Have you heard about parkour?" The entire logical Concordat delegation turned to stare at them with an intensity that suggested they were about to witness another breakdown of rational thought. "You mean there are other forms of deliberately inefficient physical activity?" the combat analysis director asked weakly. "Oh yeah," the attaché continued, apparently oblivious to the existential crisis they were about to trigger. "We basically took the most efficient way to get from point A to point B, decided it was boring, and invented increasingly complicated ways to make it more interesting. Sometimes we even compete to see who can do it in the most unnecessarily complex way." I watched as the chief logician's eye stalks began to twitch. The cadet's exoskeleton had shifted to what I now recognized as their "humans are insane" color. "Perhaps," I said quickly, before anyone could mention free running or extreme sports, "we should take a brief recess to process this cultural exchange." "Process?" The chief logician's voice had gone up another impossible octave. "Process what?" "The fact that humans intentionally develop complex systems of ritualized combat for entertainment. That they deliberately choose inefficient methods of locomotion for amusement. That they collectively agree to pretend obviously choreographed events are real while simultaneously acknowledging they aren't." "Well, when you put it that way," Captain Rodriguez began, but was interrupted by another member of the Concordat. "Wait," they said, their eye stalks swiveling rapidly. "Is this why humans have something called interpretive dance?" The room went quiet. Too quiet. "Maybe we should save the discussion about artistic expression for another day," I suggested diplomatically. "Too late." The cultural attaché's eyes had lit up. "Oh, you'd love modern dance. It's like we took normal human movement, decided it wasn't abstract enough, and—" The chief logician made a sound like a dial-up modem having an anxiety attack. "And that's enough cultural exchange for today," I announced loudly, making a mental note to schedule some mandatory diplomatic sensitivity training for certain helpful cultural attachés. "Perhaps we should adjourn and resume these discussions after everyone has had time to process." The logical Concordat delegation practically fled the room, though I did hear one of them muttering something about needing to update their species' definition of logical species to exclude creatures that intentionally make things more difficult for fun. The cadet, who had been silent throughout this entire exchange, finally spoke up. "Is this why the updated xenological guide has a specific chapter titled Human Entertainment? Abandon logic, all ye who enter here?" "Probably," I sighed. Though I think that was added after the incident with explaining improv comedy to the hive mind collective. Turns out, the concept of making it up as you go along is deeply disturbing to a species that operates on perfect consensus. "I'm beginning to understand why the original classification of humans as an emotional support species was so drastically incorrect," the cadet mused. "You're not emotional support creatures. You're chaos entities that occasionally provide emotional support as a side effect." Captain Rodriguez laughed. "That's probably the most accurate description of humanity I've ever heard. Though you might want to wait until after we explain the concept of reality TV to the logical Concordat before you finalize that assessment." The cadet's exoskeleton shifted to alarm red. "There's more?" "Oh, my sweet summer child." I patted their crystalline shoulder. "We haven't even gotten to the part where we explain why humans sometimes watch other humans playing video games instead of playing them themselves. Or why we invented sports like golf, where the whole point is to play it in the most inefficient way possible," Rodriguez added helpfully. "Or competitive eating contests. Or ASMR videos. Or—" "I need to update my report again," the cadet interrupted, their color now cycling through what appeared to be the entire visible spectrum. "Humans are not just pack-bonding predators with nuclear weapons who have formed complex symbiotic relationships with quantum cats. They're pack-bonding predators with nuclear weapons who have formed complex symbiotic relationships with quantum cats and deliberately engineer inefficiency into their recreational activities for entertainment purposes." Don't forget the part about consensual mass pretending, I reminded them. That's important for the historical record. As we left the committee chambers, leaving behind a room full of shell-shocked alien diplomats trying to process the concept of professional wrestling, I couldn't help but think about how far we'd come. From being classified as an emotional support species to being recognized as harbingers of cheerful chaos in the galactic community. The really funny part? We were still providing emotional support to other species. Just not in the way anyone had expected. After all, someone had to help them process these existential crises about human entertainment. Though maybe we should wait a while before introducing them to the concept of memes. The galaxy probably wasn't ready for that level of human chaos just yet. The end.